Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Bird. I'm the Darlin Frederick Brodsky Trustee Professor in Global Business here at the Jour McKim School of Business. And it is my great pleasure, along with my colleague from IMD, Professor Martha Masnewski, to welcome you all to the 2014 Global Leadership Summit, Global Leadership in the Middle. I want to welcome you, whether you've come from somewhere on the other side of the world, the other side of the country, or even just the other side of Boston. We're glad that you could be here. We do have quite a diverse group, and indeed that's one of the hopes and objectives of this summit is to bring people together to both share ideas and insights and to find ways to work together in furtherance of more effective, more successful global leadership. I'm going to give Martha the opportunity to talk about the theme, but before I do, I wanted to, right from the start, express my appreciation and gratitude for a number of people who have made this possible. First of all, Martha, my co-chair for this conference, has just been remarkable. We have known each other for a long time and had occasion to work together from time to time, but working together on this particular summit has been worthwhile. Beyond that, we had an extraordinary steering committee who's noted in both on the website and in your packets, I believe, and I would also acknowledge their tremendous support. And of course, things like this don't happen when academics get together. They only happen when you have an extraordinary event manager. Miss Ann Benware is responsible for all things good about this summit, from the food to the venue to the lighting and to the sound system. Would also like to thank our speakers, whether they be on a panel or one of the thought leader sessions or one of our keynote speakers, for sharing of their time and their insight. And would also thank all of those who are here and who are on their way, who are part of this summit. The whole intent of a summit, and that name was carefully chosen, was that this is not a place where a sage on the stage lectures to you. It was not a discussion group, but rather we all bring our various interests and experience and insights together, and by sharing them with one another, we benefit all, and we help move things forward. So with those appreciations, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Martha, who's going to tell you what we were thinking when we came up with the theme, Global Leadership in the Middle. Martha?
And welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here. This is the third summit, and it's been really exciting over the course of these three summits to see the kind of dialogue that can come out. If you have everybody, there's a lot of diversity in the room, but at the same time, everybody in the room is devoted to developing global leaders or learning more about global leaders or somewhere around global leadership. And so that's very exciting because we can start the discussion already here. As we were talking with the speakers earlier, there will be no discussion here about whether or not global is important. There will be no discussion about whether or not it's important to develop global leaders or to have global leaders. We can, it may not be true, but we're going to assume that everybody in the room believes it is true, and we move on from there. And that's very exciting. It allows us to push some things forward. When Alan and I were talking about what to do for this third summit, we wanted to focus around a particular theme. And we had both been thinking a lot about middle managers. Middle managers is a group of people that tend to be under-glorified in organizations. They're not on the front line, and they're also not making the big decisions. Okay, they're the ones that have graduated from being on the front line, and so they do some kind of administrative stuff around making sure the front line works, but they still haven't experienced enough or proven themselves enough to be up where the big people sit. And that's kind of, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's kind of how we think about middle managers. A lot of the research topics, if you're doing research, is focused on top management as the influencers, or on front line, partly because they're accessible, so they're easier to manage, or easier to research, sorry. But also because they're the ones that are on the front lines making things happen. And the more that we've worked with organizations, the more we see this middle management as a key to making organizations work, but in a role that has changed a lot. And we'll have a lot of the speakers address different issues around the role of middle management changing but not disappearing. But for example, I've done a lot of work in emerging countries, and one of the things that I've noticed is a real barrier to scaling, moving from the small organization to the large organization size, is a lack of middle management. And that started me thinking personally about the role of middle management in growing organizations, in growing companies, and frankly, in growing impact of responsible businesses. So what we wanted to do with this summit was really focus on those middle managers. Okay, take an opportunity to focus our research, our thinking, our practice around those people in the middle. And when we started looking at it, we saw that not only are they in the middle of organizations, okay, so they take things down and translate, they take things up and translate, which makes them in a very complicated place, stuck in the middle. At the same time, they're usually in the middle of their own careers. So they're thinking about what they want in their own career, what kind of contribution they would like to make and what kind of development. And at the same time, many of them are in the middle of their lives. So they've got kids, they've got older parents, they're dealing with all kinds of midlife transition issues. So mid-organization, mid-career, and midlife often come together at the same time, making for some very complex dynamics. And if the role of middle managers in global organizations is changing and evolving and becoming more important, then we also need to understand how that fits with middle life and middle career, and then, therefore, of course, what that means for developing this group. So that's where the theme came from. We got excited about it. Everybody we talked with got excited about it. We hope that you got excited about it too, and that's why you're here. And we hope that by the time we get through to tomorrow, that you're going home with a lot of ideas, insights, ways of thinking about this particular group of leaders and how important they are, how important developing them is to global leadership. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan, and we'll get started.
So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dean Courtney from the Dunbar McKim School of Business to formally welcome you here to the summit. Dean Courtney.
Thanks, Alan, for that formal introduction. I appreciate it. Well, on behalf of my colleagues at Northeastern University and the Dunbar McKim School of Business, it is my great pleasure to welcome you here to the 2014 Global Leadership Summit. As Alan said earlier, and Martha as well, this is the third annual summit. I think we're on to something here. It obviously is an issue that is compelling and brings together thought leaders from academia, business practice, and consulting. And we really are excited about being one of the premier locations and events for learning about global leadership. You know, this year, I really do like this year's theme, I have to say, global leadership in the middle, and I think about it every day as dean, quite honestly. You know, I used to laugh at the headlines about how much value Jack Welch created as shareholder value that Jack Welch created as CEO of GE, and I said, really? You know, did he really create all X billion dollars of that? And you know, every day when I think about my own job and think about how I can be successful as dean, I'm always looking at the program level, at the research center level. It is, in essence, kind of the faculty and staff middle managers within a college who are really extraordinarily important in driving impact and serving our students, our corporate partners, and others. So to me, I really need as much advice as I can about developing and helping to lead management in the middle, because it's essential to value creation in an academic environment, and I think in every business organization as well. I do want to comment too on, I think, I'm very proud and actually think that you are an extraordinary place to have a global leadership initiative. As many of you may know, Alan's been leading this initiative at the Dunbar McKim School now for over 3 years. We have a core set of faculty within Dunbar McKim who devote most of their research and teaching to these areas. Not surprisingly, our international business faculty is ranked among the top in the world. We're very, very proud of that. But importantly is I looked at the invite list today and who's here in the room. It's the ABCs, right? It's the academics, it's the business practitioners, it's the consultants. And That is so Northeastern. That's a quintessentially Northeastern, because our whole educational model is premised on deep engagement with practice. Research that matters, if you will, to the business practitioner, and it involves perspectives. If we're going to do research well, we need the perspectives of frontline managers and that. We need of the most thoughtful consultants who are breaking new theoretical ground as much as our academics are in many of these areas. And we feel it is our special purpose to convene events like this that bring the ABCs together. It's fundamental to our mission, and I'm so delighted that you're here. It's also particularly important that you're not all from Boston. You're from all over the globe. And again, if we want to have diversity of perspective to really have impact on practice and academic thought, this is the right group. So we have very, very high expectations for this group over the next few days, and I'm sure you won't disappoint. So in closing then, let me again just welcome you here today. As I said, I think the ingredients are here for an extraordinary event, and I really look forward to your advice on management in the middle, because, as I said, it's something that I think about every day, and I think any strong leader must, because it's pretty clear to us how important middle management is in success. So again, thank you. And Alan, do I hand it back to you? Terrific. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dean Courtney. It's my pleasure now to introduce our kickoff keynote speaker, Dr. Duncan Coombe. Originally from South Africa, he has had a diverse career. After obtaining his PhD from Case Western University, he's worked as a middle manager, so he knows whereof he speaks. He's also a global leader, having worked in a number of different contexts. He's particularly interested, indeed I would call him an expert, in what is best known as secure-based leadership. That is leadership that provides a secure place for others to grow, and also one that challenges. He's co-author of a book, Care to Dare, which is an award-winning publication that addresses those issues. He's particularly important, and one of the reasons Martha and I asked him to speak as a kickoff keynote speaker here is that he is concerned with transitions. He is concerned with looking at leaders who are in a transitional place, and that would seem to characterize middle managers. As Martha pointed out, we have people here in the room who already understand the importance of global and the importance of leadership. And we asked Duncan to speak in part to keep us honest and remember that our concern is with the middle and with transitions. And so while we may be in agreement about other things, we wanted to make sure that we didn't forget the primary focus, which is the middle and the transition. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Duncan Coombe. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You may notice already, or you may not, now you may, that the title of my talk has changed. And as often happens, as you know, with these things, when you get asked a few months ago to talk, you sort of come up with some vague generic title like Leading in the Middle, knowing that that gets you into the right ballpark. And then over a couple of months, sit there and it turns over and it turns over. And then you get a flash of inspiration. So apologies that we're going to have to update the website and a few other things. But the title has changed from Leading in the Middle to The Inferno. And for those of you who are familiar with this piece of literature, maybe more than literature, midway in life's journey, I found myself in a dark wood, having lost my way. And that's going to be the center point of what I'm going to be talking about in terms of middle management, midlife, mid-career, and all sorts of words around the middle. Now, the great joy about going first as a keynote is that it's a bit like doing a puzzle when you don't actually have to put the puzzle together. All you get to do is just pull out the pieces and throw them in the air and say, yeah, look, over the next 2 days, this one looks like a corner. This one looks like a side piece. Here's a yellow one. Here's a red one. And it's a wonderful luxury to just throw puzzle pieces in the air. However, if I throw them up relatively skillfully and they land well, my real goal for this presentation is to share some information, but hopefully also give some framing and some language and some words that over the course of the 2 days serve as a piece for the puzzle. So let's go a little bit deeper into the inferno. A big influence in what I'm saying today comes from a therapist, a counselor, and author by the name of James Hollis. If any of you are familiar with him, wonderful book about what he calls the middle passage. And this is how he frames the middle passage. The person one has been is to be replaced by the person to be. The first must die. One is summoned psychologically to die unto the old self, so that the new may be born. So between the inferno and dying psychologically, this is going to be our warm-up act. But of course, none of you know who I am, or a couple of you do, and I thought it's really important in a subject like this, when you're starting from really an open blank sheet of paper, just to give you a little bit more sense of where am I coming from, what are my perspectives, what are my biases, just so that as you're listening, you can filter in the way that you might want to, you can know what to interject, you can know what to discard. And so these are some of the perspectives that I unavoidably bring to this conversation, so that you know. So I possibly almost most importantly in terms of what grounds my practical conviction around this topic is that I do a lot of consulting work as an advisor and a consultant. But the way I go about it is that I only do embedded consultancy work. I don't do any short-term engagements. All of my clients are north of 2 years. My longest client is a 6-year engagement at the moment. And it's really deep work in the organization with a retainer, attending management meetings, being in on the key conversations, really being in the mix on important things. I don't know if they're important things, but nonetheless in the mix of daily conversations. And I literally stay away from short-term consulting work. So there's this real sense of tracking organizations, tracking leaders, being with them through their personal transitions, through organization transitions, which is a key part of how I come at this. Obviously, I teach. I must just say one point of clarification. My appointment is at Ashridge Business School in the UK. Not IMD. I have strong links to IMD. I'm an alum there. I guest lecture on the MBA program, and my relationship to Martha is what got me here. So that's where the IMD net part came from. But I just need to clarify as a point of order that I do work at Ashridge. My research, as you said, is all around psychology, developmental theory. The role of my PhD research was looking at parent influences on adult leaders and how attachment theory and our attachment styles play out through the whole of our lives. I do a lot of coaching work, not in a traditional executive coach sense, but through my consulting work, and that tends to be more counseling work. My background is in counseling, and I don't do the sort of let's do the Hey 360 and then give you 12 sessions where we design anything. It's very much let's just have a conversation about your life and what's going on. So it's got that counseling side. I am also an interfaith minister. And for better or worse, it's impossible, therefore, not to approach this conversation. And I do think I say it intentionally for this conversation. I don't normally put that up. But I do believe very strongly that the middle management piece, one huge part of it is meaning, purpose, existential questions of calling. I feel nervous for you. I know a topic you're interested in. And that comes in from a perspective. I'm a husband with all of that comes with it. And if I summarize it all, I'm a bit of an idealist, mostly a humanist in terms of my sort of heroes literature-wise, but I've also spent enough time out there managing people, leading people, and being in the action to also be very clear about the pragmatic realities of what we're trying to get done. So, enough narcissism. Let's move on. So a few months ago, middle management Middle management, life in the middle. How do you even start? So I started where all of us possibly start, is you get out your notebook, or you get out your journal, or you get out your sticky notes, or you go to your whiteboard and you just start throwing words up and see what stick. And this is where I started, because this is a new area. That's why it's being approached, middle management, and this period in the middle. So what are some of the possible places, some of these puzzle pieces that might be interesting for you over the course of these 2 days? You can read them faster than I can say them out loud, but it really covers everything. I mean, I think what's fascinating about this topic, and what's really daunting about this topic as a researcher, is where do you even enter it? Because everything's up, everything's possible, and they're huge overlap areas. But I found myself quite quickly realizing that I could enter this topic of middle management through any one of these words. Oops, let me go up one, of which there's a big question mark in the middle, of which I'm sure I've only listed a small number of places that you may have come at this topic, or when you heard the term middle management, what were the other frames, other reference points in literature or your experience or practice that come up for you. And I would hope that by tomorrow afternoon, there are many more words which have been thrown up there. So these are some of the areas that I think we can go. And then I thought, okay, how do I bring some more structure to this? And had a vague memory that, in fact, this was a familiar conversation. This is not the first time, in fact, that I've encountered middle management, even though in my research it isn't. And then I got hold of Martha, and as it turns out, I studied under Martha many years ago, and I remembered vaguely, you know what, we had to do a research project on middle management 12 years ago. And I wrote to her sheepishly to say, I don't have the document anymore. Do you possibly have that old document that we put together on middle management? And she sent it over to me, and I was quite amazed to see what a bunch of really young, fast-moving MBA students managed to come up with. That is just literally verbatim the executive summary. I don't expect you to read it, except for I will read some of the bullet points at the end. These were our two big summaries. The middle manager has to manage new conflicting demands during a period in which she is still establishing herself, her reputation, and her leadership style. The second point, many emerging leaders are simultaneously undergoing a period of considerable personal transition, potentially involving major issues such as new families, home, and countries. And that very clever picture in the bottom basically says middle managers, or what we were calling emerging leaders at that point, and shows some of the forces on them. And so I put it out there to say that we can be very clever about this topic, but actually, even 12 years ago, a bunch of MBA students, it was quite clear that there was something here, and we got onto it quite quickly in terms of some of these dynamics. So I thought, well, that's interesting. What's happened to my classmates? So I thought, well, I'm going to do my first piece of research. Maybe this will lead to a paper at some point. And I thought, well, middle managers, I'm a middle manager, or I'm of that age of middle management. Let me get hold of all my old classmates who are now definitely in that middle management zone, and let's do some research. So I sent out a note to the class, and I said, I'm giving a talk on middle management. What are your perspectives? And this is what came back. Now, this is not yet an AMR article. Maybe it'll get there one day. So I'm just leading with my data. It'll be an inductive study, some sort of grounded theory, something at some point. But I thought it was really interesting, some of their insights that came back. Again, read them as you go, and I'll just give you the headlines on a few of them. The first one made me laugh, is that we were given some midlife transition articles back then in middle management. And the first person wrote back and said, life's good, but I think I probably ought to go and read that article on midlife transitions. Then somebody else said, somewhat wistfully and admiringly, about some of the other stories that he hears about other students in our class. Somebody's making whiskey, somebody's building schools in Zambia, somebody's just dropped out to go and write a book. I shouldn't say drop out as an author. Anyway, he's changed his career to go and write a book. And I just thought that sort of wistful thing, it all sounds very exciting. I haven't yet found something that really calls me. So again, that topic of calling. Then there was this one that got my attention around something about timing, and that life is that things take time. Is that he's come to recognize that things have to go at their own pace, and just raw talent by itself isn't enough. And then this last one is particularly important, where he's talking about the importance of failure and resilience, and noting that what he didn't get and I think this is going to be a takeaway towards the end, is that, as he says, so much of the business school rhetoric and story is climb the mountain, get to the top of the mountain, onward, upward, upward. And there's very little about teaching, at least as far as I see in the 3 or 4 schools that I've encountered, which is explicitly about failure. The word resilience is coming in, and now we've got mindfulness. But how many modules are there really that's saying that you're actually going to come a cropper at some point, properly come a cropper? And you ought to know about that. And here are some skills that will help you. So that's that one. There was this comment on perfectionists and confidence, about how actually at that young age, initially, you think you can get it all right and you can fix the problem. And then when you can't, you realize that it's all a bit more complicated, and that can knock your confidence. I like this one. Life will be different to what you expect, and you probably won't be the CEO of a large organization, which, of course, is everything is told, be the CEO, be the CEO. Turns out you're really not all that special. This person's not going to get invited to do too many graduation speeches. So decide what matters to you and go and do that. Decide what you love, decide who you love, and commit yourself to that fully. I'm teaching on the MBA program at IMD in a few weeks' time, and as their transition class from the end of the program into their life, and I'm probably going to lean on this quite a lot. And then I just love this last one, where the one person said, in fact, interestingly, this last quote is probably the person who's the most successful as a CEO in all sorts of domains. And he says it's better, referencing his life. It feels great. And it's not because of whatever career progression or success I've achieved. It's because of my amazing family, my great life-work balance, and a rich spiritual life. With those basics strengthened, my career has been a joy. Even with its ups and downs, the best job as a CEO of your family. The most important enterprise is your family. Now, none of this stuff was things that people would have said 12 years prior to that. And this is what they are reflecting back as 40-somethings in parts of their life. So there's some, again, I'm throwing out ideas here. I'm not attempting to integrate and turn it into smart, consolidated insights just yet. I'm hoping to stir up some real examples. And then my final personal experience, which gives me some conviction, is for those of you who teach Exec Ed and do one-week programs, it is my experience and a lot of what I do is middle management work. When people come in, they're there for the one-week program, they're somewhere in the middle. They may be very successful and very wealthy in their organization, but nonetheless, for the purpose of what I think we're describing, they are somewhere in the middle of that organization. And we always kick off on the Sunday evening with a dinner and a welcome. It is my experience that Sunday evening is quite sobering. Not that many people come running into the rooms saying that they absolutely love their jobs and they love their careers and everything is fantastic. And this is even when they're coming to great schools and they're at great companies. There's a sort of quite a heaviness to a lot of people, and you can see that they're tired. And that's on the Sunday evening, when they're still, broadly towing the company line, if you will. Come Monday or Tuesday, they say even more. And again, I think for those of you, the researchers in the room, I'm certainly going to follow up on this. I think there's something very clear. It would be backed up by any number of engagement studies. But people aren't that happy out there at the moment, middle managers. I don't have enough length of perspective to know if that's new or not. And then Otto Sharma, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with, I was listening to, I've had 2 interactions with him in programs recently, and he started off both of his talks, and it's just interesting that this is his opening line, that his key insight that he's working off at the moment, that he's seeing from global executives, is this insight that the higher I go, the more disillusioned I feel. That's not Otto Sharma's experience of himself. That's him reporting out on other executives. So that's up there. And just as a little aside, as you would have read it by now, I do think it's also quite, and again, this is anecdotal, I don't know if it's really true, but the people who do come bounding into the classes on Sunday evenings or Monday mornings, the most fired up, the most in love with their careers, the most, seeming to not be struggling, are often the ones who've been sent by HR with emotional intelligence issues or are pace setters or bullies, and actually they are fired up, but they're quite early on in their development around that, and are still waiting for the career transition. All right. Obviously, I've got my personal experience in professional life, so we'll move on from that. How many of you are subscribers to the LeaderNet email chain at the Academy of Management? 1, 2, All right, a few of you. So you will know that the biggest topic this year kicked off just a few weeks ago, and there was a whole topic of leadership, definitions of leadership. What is leadership? What are the variables? Can you separate leadership out from outcome variables, and a whole big topic. So this whole topic of leadership, management, what is the difference between management and leadership, is still being debated every single day out there in academia, and I absolutely know that therefore the topic of middle management, middle leadership is absolutely relevant. If you read the Financial Times, you would have seen there was a topic on middle management this weekend. And then there's just so much talk in everything in the recession at the moment, and Martha alluded to this point, that with everything that we're trying to be more efficient, more productive, the place where we often go is, oh, well, let's go middle management. That sort of, if we could cut that out, you know, because that's where productivity is not great, or that's where the sort of unglamorous things are. And I think it's a fascinating area, because I think anyone who's actually been an executive knows how important that middle layer is. But it's because it's not glamorous, it's often the one that is seen as sort of, if we could get rid of middle management, is there almost an implicit assumption out there that if we could get rid of it, that would probably be the best thing? And I think that's especially up in recessions and topics of efficiency and growth. Okay, so then I have a headache, because now I've gone and thought about all these topics. I've got no structure. I've covered the waterfront, and you know, we're 10 minutes into a talk and we still no structure. So I thought, oh, well, I'm working way too hard. Let me go back to Martha's email and see what this was actually about. And in fact, it was much easier. I probably should have started there. So there really are three major questions which this summit is looking at. And it's worth stating them again, because in fact, they bring the structure in a way that is quite helpful. And because I think this is where I want to work. So we're looking at what is the complexity of their role, that middle management role. How do they develop as global leaders? And again, this is the middle managers. And how best to facilitate their growth and impact. And those become three strong orientation questions. And then I went deeper into the literature, because I thought lots of people have thought about this more than I have. And I was both struck and pleased to see how the global leadership literature, which has been developed really well in the last few years and coming out of this summit and other areas, actually has a huge amount of resonance with this whole topic of middle management. So my good news coming to you as a newbie to this forum is that this middle management topic is actually already in your sweet spot. And what I noticed is that, in fact, as I was reading the articles on global leadership, global management, I wasn't needing to go very far at all. In fact, a lot of the words around what really matters is going to be self-awareness. What really matters is understanding of complexity, ambiguity, paradox, shifting identities, and resilience, which you've already been talking about for the last few years. I think it's the same stuff. It's just probably doubled up. And there is some difference, but I'm excited to say that I think this middle management topic really just fits. It just is an extension of your existing conversation. Especially in the areas more of the personal growth, personal development area. Okay, that may have been a grid. For my purposes, very simply, I'm going to look at it in two big parts: individual considerations and the organizational considerations of this topic, and I'll take it in two parts. So the individual considerations, we're going to look at psychology, we're going to look at the career transition, give you a few ideas that will perhaps help you in your teaching, help you in your consulting, help you with your, possibly even in your own thinking about where you are. And then we'll look at the organizational level considerations of learning and development, talent, and structure. Right. One thing as you go forward, especially if you're into research and definition, I noticed myself really having to think very carefully, like, who was this person, this idealized middle manager that I was thinking about? And it kept shifting as I changed the variables around. And I was drawing this very intricate sort of 7x7 table of this person, trying to put people into boxes. And it frankly became too complicated. And I thought, well, there's a good piece of work for somebody to go and do. Because, as you said earlier, well, assume it is so. And so it's, and for the purpose of today, what I'm assuming today is we're talking about people in mid-career, middle of the organizations, in a global organization. Okay, that's just the sort of the picture of this individual I have. But that by itself is way too inaccurate when you're really getting into conversations. And so, or certainly if you're doing research. because within that there's huge variance even in terms of what that might look like. So some of the questions or things that will always have to be clarified in terms of definition is, are you talking about middle managers, middle leaders, or middle employees? It's it's the old literature conversation. Are we talking about mid-career and midlife, or is it actually just the middle manager of any career point? There is a huge difference between whether you're talking about expats or local managers. Absolutely. If you're in L&D, if you're in executive education, you know that the imperatives and what's being taught and what needs to be developed, what are the urgencies, are very different depending on those two, in terms of those two. And I think I have a suspicion, my own experience tells me this as an expat and working a lot in organizations, that I think there could be some quite significant differences there. The context of the organization is going to be absolutely critical. How global is it? How local is it? How does it split up decision-making and hierarchy? I think those variables are going to matter a lot. And then there's the whole topic of gender. A lot of this literature is quite gendered still, in terms of male perspectives on transition, male perspectives on life development, and coming all the way back from Freud and Jung and everybody. And everyone, it's just, it has to be said that the literature is quite gendered, and obviously as I stand here, that's the perspective that I have. Right, let's go in. So, 2 parts, individual considerations. So let's talk about this midlife inferno, and see if it resonates for you. In essence, what it is, it's an emerging dissonance between my outer world and my inner world. Martha, it was interesting that you were doing a lot of this earlier about middle managers, things coming from beneath, things coming from the side, or from beneath, in what I'd drawn that thing with the arrows. Intrapsychically, that is exactly what's happening in this whole period. There is a lot of shifting from above and beneath, from within and into your outer world. There's a lot of changing and shifting of what's really happening with me, who am I really, and how am I showing up in the world. So that's the fundamental tension that is going on in this midlife transition. Here's the basic picture, okay? Life's going along fine. You're developing and growing in all sorts of sensible ways. I'm massively generalizing. Of course, life's not really fine. Your parents get divorced, somebody dies, you don't get a job, girlfriend breaks up with you. So it clearly doesn't look like that, but for the purposes of our, fantastical life, broadly, things are going up in a nice shape until we get to the middle point. At which point, any number of things can happen, but we'll just talk about 3 of them broadly. 1, you can sort of get through that period, and that looks a bit too much like a flat line, but I would call that a good sort of status quo outcome. Things could deteriorate very badly, or something else can happen, which is when life kicks on or grows in a whole new way. And we need to explore that little blue dot, which has got massive implications for one's life. So what does it look like when you're in that midlife crisis and things go wrong? These are some of the symptoms that show up in therapist's office, show up in HR offices, show up in leaders' offices all of the time. Depression, infidelity, distraction, boredom, anger, resentment, job hopping, job shifts, and substance abuse. Again, if you've been out there, you know that this stuff is real, this stuff is happening all the time. And I will say to you academics, including myself, this list, I think, is one of the great untapped organizational pieces of research. It gets done a little bit on the fringes, but if I just take one, for example, infidelity, if it is true that roughly 50% of people have an affair at some point in their life, how come we do not talk about that anywhere in the literature? The only place we do is it's in the sexual harassment literature, so it's got a very, in that literature, necessary negative valence. But the absolute pure phenomenon of infidelity, whether psychological or real, I think is a fascinating fascinating phenomenon in organizational life, and it is not touched by anyone. We don't talk about a lot of these topics, and they are very real. I can see some heads nodding, and I know that those are the people who've gone anywhere near an HR job, know that a lot of this stuff is happening all the time. Senior people, junior people, middle people, successful people. So that's what it looks like when it goes wrong. What does it look like when things kick up into that next level? Here we're talking about energy, engagement, maturity, integration of alienated parts of your life. Ambition towards more whole outcomes. And then a big one of contribution, purpose, meaning, wisdom, and work-life integration. And I say work-life integration, not like work-life balance. And again, if you are new to this world, that I think is where people are going, that the topic of work-life balance, the word balance typically doesn't help people. It sends them down a road that inevitably makes them feel guilty about everything that they do. Because if it seems to be that if you're going to be a senior executive in an organization, just because balance implies 50-50 of your time, the truth is you're not going to spend 50-50 of your time getting this thing right. And so it's about integration, which is, can you make peace with the choices you've made? Have you negotiated with your key stakeholders in your family and your private and personal life around your choices? And is this job worth doing? That this integration piece actually makes you happy and makes the people around you happy. Whereas, and so I think, just as this is a little aside, I think the work-life balance topic, it's a mistake to think it's a time management problem. I suspect it's a much deeper existential issue, which is deeper than that. So that's what it looks like. And very importantly, when you kick on through the midlife, it doesn't mean that you suddenly have to go and build a school in Zambia. It doesn't mean that you have to do something different. You know, that old saying, everywhere I go, there I am. In fact, when it's really done healthily, actually, and I don't really have a valence on this, but actually it is when you stick in that marriage for longer, when you stick with that job for longer, when you see if you can actually walk through the fire of the relationship, of the career, of the job, rather than running away from it. There is a point where once having done the work, you may exit or leave. But actually the really healthy way of moving through the transition is actually if you're in a similar kind of place with a similar kind of people or the same people who you were before, but in a healthier way. So I just want to be clear, I'm not advocating that there's this point in your life where kicking on means that you've changed everything. So what age are we talking about, this whole midlife point? Okay, and if you go and read the developmental literature, you end up somewhere top 30s, middle 40s, it's somewhere around there. There's a sort of a theory of 7 that some of the developmental psychologists use going back to Jung, different views on it. Nobody's got it exactly right, but it's somewhere, you know, late 30s to middle 40s, late 40s is when this potentially is what we're talking about. But the thing that I find much more interesting is to think about time in a different way. So chronos obviously is that age dimension, okay? But the word kairos is much more interesting because it talks to time as a psychological idea rather than a chronological idea. And so in a kairos sense, what is the age? The age is when that dissonance starts to happen between the way my life has always been and what I've always thought and what seems to be happening to me now. And for some people that'll happen earlier, and for some people it'll happen later. And so I think, importantly, and this will be key in the literature, I think, is that midlife, middle management, this extra dimension will matter because I think you'll get confused, we will get confused if we say, well, look, you're 32, so this can't be you. Actually, for someone who is experiencing, let's call it the existential questions, that's it. And for other people, it hits them when they're 60, when they get sick for the first time or whatever it will be. So I think it's a nice little piece to hang on to. Right, but all this comes to life with a case study. And I could talk about somebody else, but why not just share with you how it's worked out for me? Because that's a pretty good way to do a case study. So, oh dear, is the heading. So if I go right back to the beginning, and if you want to think about developmental psychology and how this midlife transition happens, the early part of our life is all about magical thinking. Father Christmas, the Easter Bunny, all sorts of good things like that. For me, it was that I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. I walked around like him, dressed like him, everything. I was definitely going to be Luke Skywalker. Then I got a little bit older. I was reasonably good at tennis. And I decided I was going to be like Boris Becker. Okay? So it's a little bit more real, but it's broadly still quite magical. And it was really about I was going to win Wimbledon and be like Boris Becker. Now, all children go through this phase of magical thinking, and it's a beautiful thing. It's absolutely beautiful. It's essential. It's necessary. And for those of you who've got children, of course, there's always that great debate. At what point do you reveal to them, or do they discover some of the realities of their magical thinking? Then, somewhere in our teenage, early teen years, we go more towards the heroic. So the fantasy figures have gone, but we still have the sense that we are going to achieve anything that we want in the life. And we start to develop very heroic ideas. So I'm a product of the 80s, so I was getting into school, education, and sort of that's when Microsoft was really getting going. And Bill Gates becomes this person. I think I want to be like Bill Gates. So it's not the Easter Bunny, but it's something tangible, but it's not there. Then I got tired of business and decided I wanted to go into the whole world of academia. And my entry point, the sort of the gateway drug for all OB people or all people into leadership, is of course Dan Goleman, or some version of that. So it was like, okay, heroic thinking. I'm going to be like Dan Goleman. He seems sensible. He writes well. He seems to have an interesting life. I want to be like Dan Goleman. Then I got to the end of the PhD, and okay, now I must be like Adam Grant. For those of you who don't know, in my generation, Adam Grant is the rock star of organizational behavior, youngest ever tenure track at Wharton, and a phenomenal basically a publishing phenom, and everybody wants to be Adam Grant. So this heroic thinking, there's always this comparison. How can I be? Who should I be? How can I be like them? This goal of being somebody else. And then somewhere along the line, we hit the wall. When we start to realize I'm not going to be Luke Skywalker, Boris Becker, Bill Gates, Dan Goleman, or Adam Grant. I'm going to be me. And what do I think about that? Does that make me depressed? Does it make me happy? Is it a bit sobering and disappointing? You know, there are a lot of serious questions that one asks at this point when we realize we are not going to be X, Y, and Z. And even the successful people still have their X, Y, and Z who they wish they had been. Is the dean still here? You know, the dean was talking about middle managers, but even the dean has a boss. Even President Obama has a boss. Everybody has a boss. There's always somebody else who. And so this question is, am I okay to be me? Is the essence of this midlife question. And that's what we call either the realist or the human part of life. That lasts through into your sort of 40s and 50s. And then there is a fourth stage, which comes after that, which is when we start to think about mortality. And what is our relationship to death, and how do we feel about that? And in 10 years' time, I'll come and give that talk. But right now, I just wanted to lay that out for you, because this is the developmental trajectory that most of you went through, are going through. It is the trajectory that so many managers are going through. And we'll talk about something interesting, because I have an insight on the magical, heroic, and the human in organizational life to share with you in a moment. So that transition is what this is really all about. And I love this quote. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you did not bring forth will destroy you. And so the essence of this middle management moment is, can we support individuals in organizations to bring forth that which is within them? And can we, of course, do that ourselves in our jobs, in our lives, in our roles? So that's all the bad news, and I am going to need to accelerate. The great thing about doing a talk for the first time, because this was a blank page, is you've got no sense of the timings. I can tell you that I'm behind schedule. Okay. The wonderful thing about a middle is that I'm sort of playing it up maybe as a negative thing, but those of you who, somebody in one of the books wrote that I was reading last night, if you're familiar with any great narrative arc, any hero's journey, any great movie, there's always a beginning and a middle and an end. And the middle is where the cool stuff happens. That's where stuff goes down. Some movies move it the other way around and start in the wrong place. But in essence, it is the place of great despair. It is the place of great tragedy. It is the place in any great story where things are at their worst, but it is also the place where they are at their most intense. And I think as developers, as educators, if we have that perspective, that this is a period of incredible richness, and that if we can lean into that as educators, HR people, L&D people, this is the heart of the story. It really is, and we need to lean into it, not wish it away. 3 things to think about, which might be helpful. The key task of the middle passage is individuation, which is basically a fancy word for authenticity, which is a fancy word for saying, can you be your own person? That is the task at this point. Can I let go of what my mommy told me, my daddy told me, my boss told me, the HR person told me, the Bible told me, or at least parts of the Bible I don't want to look at, whatever it is, can I say, this is me, I stand alone in the places that I need to stand alone? That's essentially what individuation is all about. It's the necessary task of this period. The second one, I love this little church in London. It's called the Church of the Assumption. I'm very familiar and understand fully what it means in its truest sense. But whenever I walk past it on my daily commute, it makes me smile. Because I do think that it's wonderful that the Church of Assumption is what this period is all about. It is when you realize that your church and all of the assumptions that you had about life, about what success is, who you are, how you're going to be successful, who you're going to be with, the church starts to crumble. This midlife transition is the collapse of the Church of the Assumption. And what you thought is true is no longer true. And as James Hollis says, this midlife point is a point of being humbled. And are we willing to be humbled? Are we able to create humbling experiences, educators, or is life just going to do it? And then, of course, it wouldn't be a talk if I didn't flog my book. So my research is about secure-based leadership and the role of, in these moments, we need other people. Teachers, educators, parents, everybody knows it, that the secure bases are the people who help people learn, transition, and grow. And the role of a secure base is to provide the necessary support, confidence, and comfort on the one hand, and on the other hand, extend, challenge, push, grow, and develop. And the education literature is full of this support-challenged dilemma, and the role of secure bases is to do that. So the key point I'm saying to you here, apologies, is you cannot transition alone. You need somebody with you. And that's going to be relevant for our organizational part in a moment. We were at this point, we're going to have a discussion right here, right now, in this room. What are you thinking about? Because I'm talking about life and big moments and all sorts of things. And I was curious about where this is all landing for you and if you have questions. I'm going to go skip that now, and we'll take some questions at the very end. Let's go to the organization. So if that's the individual level phenomenon, what does this mean for us in the next few days? Well, there are a lot of variables that are going to have to be considered for the researchers in the room. Things that I know absolutely matter are organization and structure and size. It is completely different to be a middle manager in a 200-person organization versus a 20,000-person organization. It just is. So I don't know exactly how that will play out, but you won't be able to just say organizations. We'll have to be thoughtful about that. The organization structure will matter a lot about, is it a founder-led organization? Is it a management organization? Where does power really reside in that organization? What is the culture of that organization? Is it a culture that supports this kind of thinking, or is it a more traditional hierarchical organization? All of these variables are going to need to be controlled for, accounted for, thought about. It'll be very interesting work. National culture. I can't claim to be an expert on this, but I do know from a lot of my international work that, again, this whole topic, where you are in the world and the culture of the company, what its nationality is going to be relevant. And then I think really interestingly, I have a feeling the organizational life cycle will be relevant. Is that what happens if you're mid-career, midlife in a global organization that it itself is mid somewhere, or is early stage, or is late stage, and on it the classic business school S-curve, where is it? Is it still bountiful and full of opportunities and itself is feeling growthful? Which I think my hypothesis would be that probably will allow people to move through quickly or more easily because there's more going on. Or if the organization itself, in the classic S-curve, is starting to fall over a little bit, might it start to become a little bit more existentially threatened itself. There are fewer opportunities, power gets struggling. So this is one of the things that I think, as you think about your examples, could be relevant. Here's one of my little insights that suddenly struck me yesterday. If what I've been saying is right at the individual level, is it true that organizations are massively immature developmentally? Because we encourage the heroic and the magical thinking. Not that many organizations have as their mission statement to say, let's be sensible, be solid, be wise. Some do, but most of them are openly making statements around massively magical and heroic thinking around winning, domination, being number one, being the best. The talk, the aspiration, the expectation for any manager is to talk the talk of heroic thinking. And I think that dissonance is very real, because actually, in the cold night of day, at least some percentage of the time, that's not actually how people are feeling about life. That's not where they are in their personal life. They actually know some of it is, BS at that point. But the language is so inflated, is what is that dissonance? How does that... So the question becomes, how do I be real in this world when my environment is expecting me, asking me, and rewarding me for being very heroic? So the challenge in a nutshell, I think, for the individual in the organization, less autonomy, less power, fewer levers to make things happen, big distance from power in global organizations, therefore much greater dependency and interdependency, and for many people, the first real experiences of failure, career stalling, and confidence erosion. And as I was writing that list and thinking about it, of course, our old friends, competence, relatedness, and autonomy came to my mind. I have not pursued that as a deep intellectual thought, but in the literature, I think it would be quite an interesting kickoff point to say that that's a place where middle managers are particularly being challenged on all three dimensions. Relatedness, they are often far away from the power, they're far away from people. Their autonomy, their ability to get stuff done by themselves is for the first time being massively challenged on this interdependence, dependence thing. And their competence for the first time might be feeling eroded. So literature-wise, I think that's an interesting kickoff point. Finally, growth depends on one's ability to internalize and take personal responsibility. If we forever see our life as a problem caused by others, then no growth or change will occur. So how do we train people for this? And can I have 5 more minutes just to finish up quickly? Leadership development. Well, my sense is that most, not all, because there are plenty of exceptions, I've had the privilege of working on some there, most exec ed is not that well geared for this. Because if you lean into this, you're going to be having curriculums in exec ed that's going to be much more focused on system perspectives, patience, ambiguity, vulnerability, grief, failure, resilience, transition, bonding, mindsets, creativity, passion, calling, vocation, meaning, contribution, and broadening skills and experience. Yes, there's some wonderful work that people have done when they take executives around the world and they do deep dives around system stuff. But those of you who are sitting there in the audience with budgets, you know that this stuff is expensive, it's not very scalable, and it requires a tremendous amount of leader buy-in to even look at that list of words and not start yawning or fall off their chair laughing or dismiss you. Yeah? L&D professionals love this stuff. But when you say, I'm going to need a couple of $1 million to go and do a program that's going to support people to do these things, I think that's a challenge. So I come back to that same slide. We don't have to despair, though, because I actually think a lot of this work is already happening in some ways. So if what you said last year and the year before is true, that self-awareness, complexity, shifting identities, and resilience matters for global leadership, perhaps then we don't have to go too far, and it's a matter of extending a lot of the work that's already been going on and just recognizing that this is another module that needs to be put in, that it's not just the individual level of these topics in relation to the organization, but it's also seeing that there's a massive amount of very deep personal work that can be done. But using these same words without having to reinvent curricula, reinvent programs, relook at the L&D literature too much. Talent-wise, there will always be a middle, I think. People may wish it away, but I think it'll always be there. So it's important to know that. So we're going to have to think about, in the talent conversations, you've got your high potentials you're going to kick on. Do we need some new words like pillars, which are the people who are really honest citizens, who are just brilliant in any organization. And if you know your organizations, you know that these are the people who make places run. But they're not glamour people. They don't show up on the hypo lists. But gee whiz, are they important. And actually, those are your really solid, wise people who are perhaps your most integrated, mature citizens in your whole organization. And can they be honored and developed and grown in ways that actually suit that, rather than the heroic people who get sent off to fancy business schools. Long may people go to fancy business schools. Your special cases, can we look at this from an HR perspective and say these people who are struggling, actually there's something very rich and sweet, and we should be compassionate about this, and can we explore it deeply rather than just saying those people are problem people and must be moved on or got rid of, or get an executive coach and as a first step towards moving them out of the organization? Can we really say, actually, this is a very rich period? And then how do we identify these deteriorating cases where that long list of maladies is really spoken about and dealt with? And of course, we all want to be quicker and more efficient and more elegant through the middle passage. And I come back to scalable. My pragmatic mindset knows this is complicated. So people have got to go on a personal development journey. That's their work. That's their business. There's not much we can do about that, but we can support them. We can, I suggest, provocatively even insist on it. I think leadership development that doesn't actually embrace personal development and recognize that this is part of what is going to have to happen for somebody to really grow into a mature senior leader is absolutely essential. So if you told me that an organization was insisting that people didn't just get coaching but had therapy, I would think that's an interesting idea. Therapy read broadly, but lean one step further than just what are your 12 competencies and make you better at those. We grow when we're supported and supported by others. I think there's a massive role here around mentoring, peers, storytelling, all sorts of things there that can be very important. Can we as organizations build in more of that? And the big role there for L&D to do that. So I leave you with some questions to spark off some thought for the time, and these are the last slides. How might an organization support individuation? I don't know the answer, but somebody in L&D ought to be thinking about these. Can we actually tolerate the ambivalence of this period, or is it actually too unpleasant for us? Do we actually tolerate true transformation in individuals, or do we kind of actually want them to keep being good at what they're already good at? Because you know what? When a really fired up sales guy suddenly becomes terribly mature and emotionally intelligent, there's a real risk that some of those sales figures fall away, at least for a period. Because some of the deep fire in the belly that was driving the sales effort isn't there. What has to happen is another engine needs to be turned on, which is now a different kind of selling. But there's a risk there. Can we have honest conversations about realism and heroic thinking? How do we do the assessment of who's struggling and who isn't, given that it's a deeply personal issue and not something that will pop up very easily in your classic annual reviews? How do we balance the individual timelines, which are going to be longer and more nuanced than the urgency of organizational needs and outcomes? Are we willing to be really honest about this? Do we have the courage to take it on as practitioners, knowing that this is complex, difficult, hard, unglamorous, and might even be expensive? Or should we just stick with hypos and top management and know that that kind of works out quite well? Do we even really want everybody self-actualizing at work? Or is that potentially a bit messy? I've said about being successful. Researchers-wise, what is the research agenda? I hope I've thrown out a few ideas, a few places to kick off. I haven't attempted to start that, but I think that there's some seeds here that are interesting. How would we teach the subject? And I ask to all of you, both in your L&D function and in your Exec Ed function, having listened now, so what on your menu of offerings isn't there, and what might you want to put up there? I finish with a quote coming from your book that you put out last time. Thank you, Joyce, if you're here, from Aldous Huxley. And this is where I end. So the journey is over, and I am back again where I started, richer by much experience, and poorer by many exploded convictions and many perished certainties. So my wish to you for the next 2 days is may you be richer in experience and poorer in conviction by the end of this conference. Thank you very much.
We're going to go ahead and set aside some additional time for you, Duncan, to take some questions from the audience. And then we'll take a 15-minute break. We'll keep the schedule, and we'll make it up by a shorter break at the.
Okay. All right.
on the afternoon.
Thank
So
you.
go ahead
My
and break
apologies
it.
for overrunning, but so I would be absolutely thrilled to hear reflections, observations, what it got evoked or provoked at the individual level of the organization. Yes, please.
I don't think
Just hang on before you ask it. From a sound point of view, do you need a mic to go around, or is that a?
so.
Okay.
I don't think that you actually use the word value at any point in your remarks. As a business practitioner, you need to manage value creation by the group called middle management or functional management, and you need to really learn what is the value as an individual, because you're probably used to executing on easily measured outcomes in whatever is lower than middle management. And now it is more complex. So you're having to gain competencies as well as a different set of outcomes. And if you fail to do so, what you've essentially done is made yourself a commodity, which can be offshored, outsourced, or both. So how do you weave value into, being lost in the dark wood?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. It goes to that very first slide where I said, what are some of the questions that come to this? I'm going to do what the person at the lectern is allowed to do and say, I don't know. I just think it's a great question, and it's a wonderful one to explore in these 2 days. Other than just to say I completely agree, is that at this point, yeah, I used to do I'm not saying me, but if you're in that organization, I do sales. A good month is when I hit my mark. In a few years' time, my good mark, I will be successful when I can, have a whole BU which is under my name. But at this point, yeah, how do I know if I've had a good day? How do I get assessed? It genuinely is more complicated. I can give you some trivial answers, or trivial suggestions, but it wouldn't do justice to a good question. I won't do that to every question, but that's a good one. Yes, Phil.
A small counterpoint is most senior executives will say, if I look at my tombstone and it says he or she created a lot of value, I haven't led the right life. So one of the questions that get raised is, are we in a paradox here where you're asking the middle managers a question, you create value, where the senior executives are then saying, is this all it is? Is this what my life is all about?
Yeah. So two quick thoughts. I was going to mention something, and Phil, this is something you mentioned to me a few years ago on the whole topic of calling, just as an extra piece on the midlife transition. You and I had a conversation about calling, and you said it's very interesting. Everyone is discussing the calling. What is your calling? And you said the unasked question in the literature thus far is, who is doing the calling? And in this midlife point, I think partly what is shifting is that the calling shifts from being what my father, mother, school, whatever was calling me to do, to an internal calling. Depending on your spiritual belief, that's maybe an external calling or an internal calling, but nonetheless, the voice of calling is coming from another place, and it is not typically the shareholder at that point, in truth. But we're going to work, we want to be successful, and value does matter. And how am I valued, how am I rated, how am I assessed truly does matter. And so I think one has to find a way of squaring that one. That you can be as wise as you want, but if you don't understand your value metric in an organization, may not be on your tombstone, but it's going to ultimately matter whether you can pay the rent in a few months' time. Thank you. There was another hand went somewhere, I think. We're ready for tea. Great. Okay, great. There we go. There's one more there.
I can't help myself but want to try to solve already from a personal development perspective. What are some thoughts that you've had in terms of looking at how parents influence now leaders and how we can, forgive me for saying this, but quickly help them unravel some of that and move where they want to be more authentically.
Yeah, yeah. So all of the leadership training that I do is in that domain. So there are examples of it. And there are actually, I think there's more and more leadership training now. There is more and more leadership training, the good leadership training that has this personal growth element firmly built in. I can tell you on the MBA program that Martha is the program director. I hope this is not a breach of confidence, but every student has to have therapy. They have a set of therapists to come in. Is that a breach, I hope? It's actually optional. Optional? Yeah. Okay. Basically, they all do it. As this sort of saying, well, if we're going to do this, then because frankly, myself included, most business school professors aren't set up for that task. Wasn't on my PhD curriculum how to do this stuff. So it does require external people. So I think you have to go into it straight. You can give people books to read. They can learn about it. But I think there's really no short-circuiting it. So you somehow have to introduce them into the conversation. But there are very practical ways of doing this in ways that are interesting and growthful and enlightening, and that it doesn't mean that everybody has to lie on the floor crying, wishing their mother hadn't dropped them on the floor. You know, it does. I mean, that's interesting insight, but it's not where the conversation finishes. So my answer is you can't short circuit it, but no, you can speed it up at least for the corporate purposes, but not by avoiding it. The question is it deterministic? Should you be assessing for it? Is it any of your business how their childhood was and all of that stuff? We can debate that. But their childhood comes to work anyway, so that's just a psychological truth that our whole life comes to work. And yet as HR professionals, we sort of try to we only sort of see it from the adult part. Great. I'm going to stop there. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to having more conversations with you in the next few days.